Welcome. It is Verdict with Ted Cruz, the weekend review. Ben Ferguson with you, and here are the big stories that you may have missed that we talked about this week. First up, Senator Cruz lays out why the Save America Act is vital to our nation's voting integrity. Also, a showdown in Texas. So who is James Tallarico? We explain it. And finally, the liberal icon and hero of the left, César Cháv. Well, now the New York Times is saying he's a child rapist. It's the Weekend Review, and it starts right now. So, Senator, let's talk about just first the lay of the land and how we got to where we are today and the vote. There's a lot of people wondering what the vote was to move this forward, so now there's debate. And so tell us who didn't vote for this on the Republican side. It was a very tight vote. And also explain what's going to happen over the rest of this week.
Well, the vote on the Senate floor to take up the Save America Act was 51 to 47. So 51 Republicans voted to take it up. The only no vote was Lisa Murkowski out of Alaska. And then Tom Tillis from North Carolina, who is retiring, did not vote. So he was not a no vote, but he didn't vote. Other than that, every Republican voted to take it up, and we're now in the midst of the battle. Now, we can anticipate the Democrats are a hard no, and so we're taking the case to the American people and trying to build support for it. And so I went to the Senate floor to lay out the case for why the Save America Act is so critical and why the opposition for the Democrats is so ridiculous. And so here's what I had to say on the floor of the Senate this week. Mr. President, later this year, American citizens across the country will exercise one of their most valuable and sacred rights, the right to vote. A right that has been hard-earned and fought for from the founding generation of our republic to today. And how was the right to self-government, the right to vote, secured? It was secured by American colonists who rejected the royal edict and hurtled tea into Boston Harbor, declaring no taxation without representation. It was secured by ordinary men who seized their muskets and fired the shot heard round the world at Lexington and Concord. It was secured by Continental troops who marched to the fields of Saratoga and the coastline of Yorktown, repeating those immortal words of Patrick Henry: give me liberty or give me death. For nearly 250 years, Americans have cast their votes for leaders at every level, from local officials to state representatives to the President of the United States. Every member of this body is here today because we were elected fairly and honestly and given a mandate by our constituents to serve them here in Washington and to protect the liberties and freedoms our founders fought to preserve. The power of the ballot box determines the course of our nation, the history we are writing, and the freedoms that we continue to defend. And while no single ballot in isolation may seem decisive, together, the votes of the American people shape the course of our nation and the course of history. But it is worth remembering that our voting system did not begin as it exists today. When this nation was founded, the right to vote was limited, and over time, through debate, sacrifice, a bloody civil war, and constitutional amendment, the right to vote was quite properly expanded. The 15th Amendment prohibited denying the vote based on race. The 19th Amendment guaranteed women the right to vote. And the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18. At every stage of our constitutional amendment process, the goal was the same: to ensure that the right to vote belonged to American citizens and that it was exercised with integrity. And while our system has evolved, one principle has remained constant. Elections reflect the will of the American people. For a right so sacred, for a privilege so hard fought, it is shocking, it is tragic, how neglected and vulnerable the protection of our elections has become. That is why I'm here today on this very floor, urging the members of this body to pass the Save America Act. It says that when you register to vote in a federal election, you must provide proof that you are a citizen of the United States, and you must provide photo ID to vote. In simple terms, that's it. This is not some radical, politicized, or weaponized piece of legislation designed to restrict Americans from voting. It is a common sense measure that protects the integrity of our elections by ensuring that American citizens and only American citizens are voting in them. Legitimacy in a democracy rests on two pillars. First, the mechanical integrity of the system to produce a valid result, and second, the public's confidence in that system. If either one fails, the system falters. If both fail, the system collapses. A system that cannot be trusted is a system that cannot govern. If you look around the world, between 2/3 and 3/4 of countries require some form of identification to vote. Why? Because it safeguards the integrity of their elections and reinforces public trust in their system. So it begs the question, why hasn't the United States fully embraced this standard? Well, for the last several months, we have heard claim after claim about how this legislation would somehow inhibit people from voting, that requiring identification is discriminatory, that the American people do not support voter ID. Mr. President, our Democrat colleagues are fond of bellowing into the TV cameras that photo ID to vote is Jim Crow. They tell us with mock earnestness. Now, I will admit, our Democrat colleagues should be experts in Jim Crow, because it was Democrat politicians who passed the Jim Crow laws. It was Democrat politicians who founded the Ku Klux Klan. It was Democrat politicians for decade after decade who enforced discrimination, separate but equal, poll taxes, and a host of other laws designed to prevent African Americans from voting. But do you know who has rejected their disingenuous claim that photo ID to vote is Jim Crow? The Supreme Court of the United States. Supreme Court of the United States, the state of Indiana, passed photo ID law requiring that you show a photo ID to vote. A group of left-wing plaintiffs filed litigation challenging that. The case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. At the time, I was the Solicitor General of the state of Texas. I led a coalition of states before the Supreme Court defending photo ID to vote. And the left-wing plaintiffs made the same argument that our Democrat colleagues make today, that requiring photo ID to vote would somehow disenfranchise minorities. The Supreme Court, by a vote of 6-3, rejected their argument. The author of the majority opinion was John Paul Stevens. John Paul Stevens was one of the great liberals on the court. He was not a conservative. He was not on the right wing. He was the leading liberal for years on the U.S. Supreme Court. He rejected that claim, and he pointed out that when someone votes illegally, they are stealing the votes of legal voters. They are stealing the votes of American citizens. The Supreme Court explained that when photo ID laws have been implemented, minority participation in the election goes up, not down. And the Supreme Court explained that requiring photo ID enhances the integrity of an election and the integrity of democracy. Now, our Democrat colleagues don't want to acknowledge any of those facts. And I guess it's understandable, because the American people have heard their specious arguments and they have rejected them. Mr. President, 81% of Americans support requiring photo ID to vote. But my Democrat colleagues might say, what about African Americans? Well, about 3/4 of African Americans in the United States require
support requiring photo ID to vote. How about Hispanics? More than 80% of Hispanics in America support requiring photo ID to vote. How about Democrats? Here's an astonishing statistic. If you get out of elected office, if you ask a Democrat on the street, 70% of Democrats in America support requiring photo ID to vote. The one group that doesn't are elected Democrats in the United States Senate and the United States House. And by the way, the premise of their argument that minorities, if you require photo ID to vote, are not going to be able to vote is frankly insulting. Mr. President, I'm proud to be an Hispanic American. I've been an Hispanic all my life. You know what I've got in my wallet? I have a driver's license. I look at my colleagues across the way. I feel confident they have driver's licenses in their wallets as well. Hispanics are not morons. African Americans are not morons. And when you claim minorities can't figure out how to get a driver's license, well, gosh, what do you need a photo ID to vote to do right now in America? You need a photo ID to purchase alcohol or to purchase tobacco. You need a photo ID to gamble or purchase lottery tickets. You need a photo ID to go into a bar. You need a photo ID to get on a plane. You need a photo ID to rent a car. You need a photo ID just to drive a car, not even rent a car, drive a car. You need a photo ID to apply for government benefits. You need a photo ID to enroll in college. You need a photo ID to open a bank account. You need a photo ID to check into a hotel. And I got to admit, this is my personal favorite. You need a photo ID, actually 2 photo IDs, to shovel snow in New York City. These are routine, everyday activities. The gallery is full. I feel confident everyone in the gallery who is not a child has a driver's license. And by the way, you wouldn't be admitted to the gallery if you didn't. And I feel confident every member of this chamber has done just about anything I listed well, except shoveling snow. I'm not convinced many of my colleagues have shoveled snow. Oh, they do shovel other things. The question is not whether Americans are bright enough to obtain photo ID. We know they can, and we know they do. The real question is, why would we not require the same level of verification for something as consequential and vital as voting? Are our Democrat colleagues saying voting doesn't matter? Or is it something else? Voting is not just another everyday activity. It rolls around every year, a few years. And it is the vehicle that protects the principles of our republic and safeguarding what matters. This legislation is necessary because there are individuals and systems that can undermine confidence in our elections if proper safeguards are not in place. And one of the most apparent ways that we've seen is through the masses of illegal immigrants that our Democrat colleagues let in through open borders over 4 years. During the Biden administration, more than 12 million illegal immigrants flooded into this country. The vast majority through my home state of Texas. Now, Mr. President, understand that was not an accident. That was not something the Democrats could not stop. That was their desired outcome. How do we know that? Because the instant President Trump was sworn into office for his second term, illegal border crossings plummeted 99% overnight. The Democrats said, no, Joe Biden can't secure the border. He needs new legislation. We now know that was a lie. It was objectively false, and they knew it was false. Well, if they could have secured the border for 4 years and they chose not to, they chose to let murderers into this country, they chose to let rapists into this country, they chose to let child molesters into this country, they chose to let gangbangers into this country, they chose to let terrorists into this country. We've had 4 radical Islamic terror attacks in the last 2 weeks. Why, Mr. President, would the Democrats choose to allow more than 12 million illegal aliens to invade this country? And I'm going to suggest the obvious reason. Because the Democrats look at those illegal aliens and they want them to cast vote for Democrats in federal elections. Why are the Democrats lined up and say, no, 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 under no circumstances should we test to see if you're an American citizen. Under no circumstances should we require photo IDs. You know, there was one activist a few years ago who filmed himself going into a D.C. polling place. D.C. polling place said, "Sir, what's your name?" And he said, "My name is Eric Holder." Now, this activist was not the Attorney General of the United States at the time. But yet D.C. handed him a ballot and said, "Mr. Holder, please cast your vote." The Democrats are lined up in this chamber because they want our elections to be insecure. They want voter fraud to be rampant and to be easy. Ask yourself, do the American people have a difficult time buying a beer? Do they have a difficult time getting into an R-rated movie? Do they have a difficult time getting on an airplane? Well, yes, because the Democrats have refuses to fund the TSA, and so there are long lines right now. But the lack of a photo ID is not an impediment that stops people from flying. This debate is about something very simple. Do our elections matter? Does our democracy matter? And boy, Mr. President, I got to say, that is a phrase the Democrats love. That they are defending democracy. It's interesting, their voice usually drops an octave when they say that. They clutch their pearls. And that's just the men. Defending democracy is what they say. Ask yourself, why are they not concerned at all about 12 million illegals who they let into this country voting illegally? I'll submit, Occam's razor provides the simplest solution is usually the right one. The simplest solution is very clear. The Democrats in this body want illegals to vote for them. They want power enough that they are more than happy to undermine democracy to try to seize power. I get that from their personal self-interest. But it is not in the interest of the men and women they represent. It is not in the interest of the people of America. This bill is rightly called the Save America Act. And Mr. President, if we were voting on the merits of what was good for America, what was good for democracy, what was good for American citizens, the vote would be 100-0. Although I would note on the other side of this building at the State of the Union address that you were at, that I was at, we saw why our Democrat colleagues are so adamantly opposed to this bill. President Trump turned to the Democrats on the right side of the floor of the House, and it gave them an opportunity to demonstrate with absolute clarity. He said, if you agree, our first priority should be to fight for American citizens and not for illegal aliens. Please stand. And every single Democrat in Congress remains seated. Not a one of them. I would note, as we're on the floor today, of the 47 Democrats in this body, only one is here on the floor. But a whole lot more were on the floor during the State of the Union. Every one of them chose to remain seated because they could not support the statement that we need to support American citizens and not illegal aliens. That's why they oppose the Save America Act, because they want to be handed power over this country by the illegal aliens they let into this country. That's why we need to save America. And it's why I urge every member of this body to pass the Save America Act.
Now, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, you can go back and listen to the full podcast from earlier this week. Now on to story number 2. So, Senator, there's something very interesting that keeps brewing, and it's a theme in Texas. That theme now is Democrats keep trying to find radical liberals that they masquerade into some sort of like moderate to then run for the Senate. But if you just go back and look at their own words, they're moonbats.
Yeah, look, so the Democrats in Texas have nominated for the U.S. Senate this guy named James Tallarico, who was a state representative. He'd only been in the legislature a couple of years. He had not achieved much of anything. And why did they pick some young state rep to be their Senate nominee? Well, turned out the guy went to seminary. And they're like, oh, look, this is great. Now, look, today's modern Democrat Party, they hate people of faith unless you happen to be an Islamist and you're trying to kill people. They like them. But other than Islamists that are trying to murder people, anyone of faith, they can't stand. And they especially can't stand Christians.
Yes.
But I think the Democrats are frustrated that they keep losing in Texas. They keep getting their butt kicked. And so they're like, all right, we need to find someone. And they're like, oh, this guy went to seminary. He speaks Christian. This is their theory of the case. Like he can talk to those strange people who believe in that Jesus guy. That's how Democrats.
He's read that Bible thing before, right?
Strategists are thinking. And the only problem is, like, this guy is weird. Yeah. And again, don't take my word for it. I'm just going to introduce you to James Tallarico. First of all right, let's listen to this preacher talk about God. What does he have to say about God? Well, give a listen.
The first 2 lines of the Bible, the first 2 lines in Genesis, use 2 different Hebrew words to describe God. One is the masculine Hebrew noun for divinity. The second is the feminine Hebrew noun for spirit. God is both masculine and feminine and everything in between. God is non-binary. In Genesis 1:26, God speaks of God's self in the plural, saying, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us." That's the infinite multitude of God. The masculine, the feminine, and everything in between. Trans children are God's children, made in God's own image.
Now, Senator, I've heard of stretches before using the Bible, but when you're like, let me just take you to the very beginning, and here's how I'm going to morph that into like this, like that's a whole new level. And even the room, the people around him are kind of like looking like, is he really doing this? It's a great video.
Look, God ain't non-binary, and yes, God is plural because you've got the Trinity of God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, 3 in 1. But that does not mean that he says, well, God created male, female, and everything in between. No, He created Adam, He created Eve, and He stopped. Yeah, He didn't create a third creature that was neither male nor female. He created both. Okay, so you might say, all right, that's fine, but maybe that's just sort of a curious theological quirk. Well, he had more to say about people who are transgender, and it might kind of surprise you. Listen to what he had to say about the trans community.
Before we go further, I want to acknowledge that our trans community needs abortion care too. Defending trans Texans is something we have to do every day.
Now that one, if you're not watching this on YouTube, I just want to set the stage, Senator. There is literally communion table behind him.
Yep.
2 candles that are lit. And he's like, now let me just tell you, the trans community, they need abortion care too. Like, I'm just curious, like where in the scripture is that in there? Like, I'm waiting, this guy that went to ministry, I just want to know where he found that.
The guy says that in a church, and I guess is pretending to be a preacher. But you understand, this is his priority: abortions for people who are transgender. Like that. I'm sorry, that is just out there. Yeah. And this is the pressing priority. But look, I got to admit, the reason he's saying all of this is that he's got to apologize for his own overwhelming masculinity. And again, don't take my word for it. Give a listen to him explaining.
No need to sit and cry over, your whiteness or your masculinity.
Right.
Use it.
Yep.
Use it to do something.
Yeah.
Let's be productive.
I mean, amen, Pastor, on that one, right? Like, that is just preach, sign me up. Where can I go to get more of that?
Okay, I got to say, for those of y'all who are not watching on YouTube, you really should watch on YouTube. Because no need to cry over your masculinity.
Yeah.
Said no person who had even a shred of masculinity. I mean, this is a guy who makes Pete Buttigieg look manly.
You're not lying, by the way.
This is a guy, if like a soy latte could speak, that would be Democrat James Tallarico.
That is my new official analogy that you've ever said on this show. That is number one now.
And by the way, okay, so he's not very masculine. He's crying about his masculinity, what little of it he has. But at least he's an American, right? I mean, he's at least proud of America. Well, not so much. Give a listen to what he has to say about that.
I often think when reclaiming symbols, I think about the American flag. I think the Confederate flag is a symbol of treason and terrorism. But the American flag is such a complicated symbol for most of us. And in many ways, like Jesus, like the cross, it's been co-opted and in some ways its true meaning has been betrayed.
By the way, I didn't know that we had co-opted Jesus so much. Like, that's breaking news there, Senator.
So look, this is a supposed pastor who is embarrassed about Jesus, embarrassed about the cross, and now embarrassed about the American flag. But okay, look, you set everything else aside. It's Texas. At least he stands with barbecue, right?
Yes, that's true.
No,
that's important.
No, it's not. Give a listen to what he has to say on meat.
We have, I think, heard more and more issues of animal welfare. I think not just because it's the right thing to do and the moral thing to do, but also it's, as all of you know, necessary to fight climate change. It is now existential that we try to reduce our meat consumption and that we try to respect animals in all aspects of society. And so I am proud to say that our campaign has officially become a non-meat campaign. So we are only buying vegan products from our local vegan businesses.
The guy hates barbecue.
Yeah.
Perfect for Texas. They've found their candidate. The Democrats understand Texans.
As before, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation on this topic, you can go back and download the podcast from earlier this week to hear the entire thing. I want to get back to the big story, number 3 of the week you may have missed. All right, finally, Senator, let's wrap with a story that another hero of the left, it looks like it was a crazy person that is now going to go down in history in disgrace. This time it's a guy by the last name of Chavez.
So this is our hypocrisy, not just trifecta, but 4 of a kind. So we started with Kathy Hochul, the hypocritical Democrat governor of New York. We then went to James Tallarico, the very, very strange Democrat nominee for the Senate. We then went to Joe Kent, the previous Trump supporter who has decided now that Trump is under an assassination threat from Israel. And finally, César Chavez. Who is César Chavez? He is a hero to the Democrats, a hero to the left, an icon. He was a union organizer for the United Farm Workers, and he is revered, except for the fact that famed right-wing publication, the New York Times, just published an expose that for years he was raping little girls. Yeah. And they come with the receipts that he had raped little girls year after year after year, and the left had covered it up. They'd covered it up because they agreed with his politics. And I got to say that there's a really good opinion piece that the Daily Wire ran by a woman named Ariana Guajardo, who's a Texan and a Latina. And here's what she wrote. I want to read a good chunk of it because it actually is a good insight. It's entitled, "The Left Hid César Chávez's Rapes and Turned Him into a Saint." She begins, "When I was in college, I passed the César Chavez statue every day on my walk to class at the University of Texas. Now César Chavez is the name of the road I take to work, and it's a big road right in downtown Austin. For years, Chavez was presented as the figurehead for Mexican Americans, a symbol we were expected to revere. but he represented a collectivist ideology that perpetuated ethnic tribalism. After the New York Times broke the story of his sexual abuse of young girls, this false idol is finally toppling. My only hope is that he is not replaced by another. Chavez has long been celebrated as a symbol of the civil rights era and as a champion of labor unions in America. He co-founded the United Farm Workers Union to fight for better conditions for migrant laborers. But in truth, he exploited the very people he claimed to protect, while tying Mexican Americans to socialist ideology, which is, of course, what the Democrats want. He carefully crafted a public image as a family man devoted to Catholic social teaching, but the reality was much darker. Chavez's philosophy echoes Marxist rhetoric about the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. At a UFW convention in 1981, Chavez proclaimed, "I would not take one cup of coffee from a grower," and he means a farmer. "There's not a good one. I hate them. A few presents, a little talk, then the noose. That's how capitalism works." This is the hero of the left. It isn't just his rhetoric that sounds alarm bells. Early in his career, he worked with Saul Alinsky, the community organizer who defined the modern leftist playbook in Rules for Radicals. Chavez and the UFW later implemented Alinsky's tactics, fostering confrontational, divisive organizing. Then there is the recent revelation of his extensive sexual abuse of minors. The behavior is not distinct from other far-left figures, such as Joseph Stalin, to Mao, to Kim Jong-il. Communist and socialist leaders often share a troubling connection to sexual predation. We should not be surprised that evil ideology attracts evil people. By the way, that's a sentence worth remembering. Yeah. We should not be surprised that evil ideology attracts evil people. If the warning signs around Chavez have existed for decades, why did he become the face of an entire ethnicity in America? Partly because he was effective at mobilizing Mexican Americans in California, using rhetoric that created a lasting us versus them mentality.
Yep.
But how did that ideology extend to Texas? Chavez never belonged to the Tejano heritage the same way he does in Chicano culture. The Chicano culture and movement are a direct outgrowth of the California Hispanic labor movement in the 60s and 70s. On the other hand, the Tejano culture traces back to the Mexican settlers of Texas prior to Texas independence and is a component of what created the Texas identity. That history is also tied to farming and a cowboy ethos that is incompatible with Chavez's ideology. Texas agriculture thrived because of ranchers like my ancestors who embraced a free market approach, not because of unions or collectivist movements. Before the New York Times expose, one could argue that Chavez fought for Mexican Americans and deserved gratitude. Yet his legacy has encouraged a troubling mindset. To be loyal to one's Hispanic heritage, one must embrace left-wing ideology. On campus, I was often labeled a, quote, race traitor at conservative events, accused of, quote, wanting white approval, or dismissed as, quote, too white passing to comment on border and immigration issues. By the way, Jorge Ramos on Spanish television accused me of being a traitor to my race, so I'm quite familiar with that. The type of tribalism promoted by Chavez is just like any other kind of identity politics, limiting and stereotyping the people it is intended to empower. In the political climate in which Texas Hispanics are considering Republicans on the ballot, it is clear why the left is feeling threatened. So why is a street in Austin named after Cesar Chavez? Why did his statue watch me as I walked to class? The answer is clear. Ethnic tokenism. It was fitting for Bill Clinton to award him a Presidential Medal of Freedom. By the way, Bill Clinton, speaking of sexual predators, there may have been a reason there. And for Joe Biden to display his bust in the Oval Office. Joe Biden literally put up a bust of Cesar Chavez, who was a child rapist, in the Oval Office. Chavez represents the Hispanic worker the political left wishes we all were: obedient to a union boss and beholden to collectivist ideology. The UFW announced it will not be celebrating Cesar Chavez Day this year amid the allegations. The idol all Hispanics were once expected to adore is finally falling from his pedestal. My hope is that we do not replace him with another. Look, I think that is exceptionally well written.
Well done, and I have to give a little credit to the New York Times for actually publishing it.
Yes, agreed.
I'm shocked. I really am.
Now, to be clear, Chavez is not a current leftist leader. If he was a current leader of the Democrat Party, I don't think they would have published it. But given that he's dead and buried,
it's after
I think
the fact, right?
It was after the fact. And look, what is sad is that so many Democrats, so many leftists knew that he was a child rapist, and they kept their mouths shut because ideology mattered more than truth or protecting kids.
As always, thank you for listening to Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz. Ben Ferguson with you. Don't forget to download my podcast, and you can listen to my podcast every other day you're not listening to Verdict, or each day when you listen to Verdict afterwards. I'd love to have you as a listener to, again, the Ben Ferguson podcast, and we will see you back here on Monday morning.